Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Goodman. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, African and Asian channels. News agencies, writers, AFP, AP have also reported the same news. Now the news headlines. Arizona, America abortion law of 1864 is now alive. Speaker Mike Johnson of U.S. Congress is in trouble. Remembering Rwanda genocide which occurred in 30 years ago. 200 chemical plants under scrutiny for environmental regulations in the United States. California can set its own emission limits. European court against Switzerland. Court fined railway company in US. Parents sentenced for children crime. Hamas, Israel, America, British Foreign Secretary. America show anger against Israel. Ukraine attack on Russia. Trump request rejected by court. On Wall Street, Dow Jones down, Nasdaq and S&P 500 up. Now the news in detail.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, Arizona Supreme Court upholds a Civil War-era abortion law, effectively banning the procedure in the state.
Congressman Mike Johnson fights to remain as House Speaker among a divided Republican Party.
And reconciliation and rebuilding in Rwanda, 30 years after the genocide that killed more than 1 million people. We decided to forgive and we decided to move on, but that thing still lingers. It's a human, natural thing.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
These are people who are trying to change the world. Startups have this energy that energizes me. I'm thriving by helping others every day. People who know video.
On an American Cruise Line's journey, travelers experience the maritime heritage and culture of the Maine Coast and New England Islands. Our fleet of small cruise ships explore American landscapes, seaside villages, and historic harbors, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their client's best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Arizona will soon be the latest state with a near-total abortion ban after that state's Supreme Court revived a 160-year-old law. The law provides no exceptions for rape or incest. And in its 4-2 opinion, the conservative majority wrote, quote, physicians are now on notice that all abortions, except those necessary to save a woman's life, are illegal.
Doctors who perform abortions could face criminal prosecution and prison time, though the Democratic Attorney General says she will not prosecute. It's the latest test of the limits on abortion since the Supreme Court ended federal abortion protections from the decades-old Roe v. Wade decision. And in this election year, there's already an effort underway to get a pro-abortion rights amendment on Arizona's ballot in November. Arizona's Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs responded to today's court decision.
Arizona's 2022 abortion ban is extreme and hurts women. And the near total Civil War-era ban that continues to hang over our heads only serves to create more chaos for women and doctors in our state. As governor, I promised I would do everything in my power to protect our reproductive freedoms.
Carter Sherman covers reproductive health for The Guardian and joins us now. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So the Arizona State Supreme Court lifted a stay on this 1864 law that was passed before Arizona was a state. Help us understand how they arrived at this decision.
So this ban has been the source of court battles and chaos since the overturning of Roe almost 2 years ago. What happened is, after a very long period of litigation, the Supreme Court of Arizona decided today that since there is no more Roe v. Wade, there is no reason why this 1864 ban should not go into effect. Now, what's unclear at this point is when exactly that ban will fully take effect and be enforceable. In the words of the court, abortion providers and their supporters are at this time really trying to figure out what this decision means for all the people on the ground in Arizona.
How is it that the Civil War era law supersedes the previous law that the legislature passed and the previous governor signed in 2022 that made abortion accessible up to 15 weeks?
When the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion nationwide in Roe v. Wade in 1973, that meant that there were several laws across the country that dated back decades that were no longer going to be in effect. And many of these laws were never really truly dealt with. They just went dormant. And so when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe in 2022, suddenly all of these states, including Arizona, had to deal with these so-called zombie laws that they had not ever really fully reckoned with. Arizona had also in 2022 passed a separate 15-week abortion ban, but what happened was that 15-week abortion ban and this near total abortion ban from 1864 just sort of coexisted, and they weren't really harmonized in any kind of way. In this case in particular, Planned Parenthood has argued that these laws needed to be harmonized, and that's why that the 15-week ban should be allowed to stand over the 1864 ban. That's not the argument that the Arizona Supreme Court accepted today.
Well, in the meantime, Arizona's Attorney General Chris Mays says she will not prosecute any doctor who performs abortion procedures. Mays says that this is a collective effort with the state's governor. How is that being received by county prosecutors who could potentially use their own discretion?
I think that there are many questions about what it really means for an official like Mays to say that she will try to hold off on any kind of prosecutions of abortion providers. The providers that I've talked to and I've heard from don't necessarily feel like they are totally in the clear at this point, and they are confused about what it means moving forward if they were to provide abortions.
What's the expected impact on women's healthcare in Arizona and in the surrounding region?
Arizona has been a critical release valve for places like Texas, which have a total abortion ban on the books right now. So if we ban abortion totally or almost totally in Arizona, there's going to be plenty of people throughout the Southwest who previously might have fled to Arizona for abortions who will now have to travel even farther out. Abortion rights supporters also say that this could have massive impacts on things like maternal mortality. So there's going to be really wide-ranging effects really across the region in a variety of health areas.
And there's also the political impact. Arizona, as you well know, is among a handful of key battleground states. An effort is already underway right now to put a measure on the 2024 ballot that would enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. How might this affect not just the presidential election, but that key Senate race, that hotly contested Senate race in Arizona?
I think that this decision today is going to make Arizona one of the biggest battlefields, particularly in abortion, but also in the presidential race, also in the Senate race in the 2024 elections. What we're looking at here is a potentially very galvanized population outraged by the overturning of Roe, outraged by a near total abortion ban, and those people might decide to go to the polls en masse and vote not just for abortion rights, but also for Democrats. There's actually been, since the decision came out today, many Republicans in the state saying, this was a bad idea, I don't support this decision, and some of them have said that they will work to try to figure out a way back to this 15-week abortion limit and not the near total abortion ban. I've covered this issue for many years. I've covered it long before Roe was overturned, and I have never really seen this sort of immediate 180 from Republicans in this way on this issue.
That is Carter Sherman with The Guardian. Thanks so much for sharing your reporting and your insights with us.
Thank you for having me.
In the day's other headlines, the Environmental Protection Agency is cracking down on pollution from some 200 chemical plants from Texas to the Ohio River Valley. Administrator Michael Regan said the new regulations offer, quote, strong final standards to slash pollution, reduce cancer risk, and ensure cleaner air for nearby communities. Also today, an appeals court upheld the EPA's decision to allow California to set its own strong final standards to slash pollution, reduce cancer risk, and ensure cleaner air for nearby communities. Also today, an appeals court upheld the EPA's decision to allow California to set its own tailpipe emissions limits and electric vehicle requirements. Europe's highest human rights court ruled today that the Swiss government has not done enough to protect its citizens from climate change. Experts say it's the first ruling of its kind. A group of 2,000 elderly Swiss women brought the case. The landmark ruling was read in a packed court in France. One of the Swiss plaintiffs reacted afterward.
Senior Women for Climate brought climate and fundamental rights to court for the first time. And the court recognized our fundamental right to a healthy climate and to have our country do what it failed to do until now, to take ambitious measures to protect our health and future.
The court rejected 2 other climate cases on procedural grounds. That all follows the EU Climate Agency announcing that last month was the hottest March on record. Rail operator Norfolk Southern has agreed to a $600 million settlement for last year's train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. The train caught fire and released more than 1 million gallons of hazardous material. Residents within 20 miles of the crash who suffered, quote, potential adverse impacts are eligible for compensation. The parents of the teenager who killed 4 of his Michigan schoolmates in 2021 have been sentenced up to 15 years in prison. Jennifer and James Crumbly were convicted of involuntary manslaughter for failing to prevent their son's actions. They are the first parents in the U.S. to be convicted over deaths caused by a child in a mass shooting. Their son is serving life in prison without parole. Hamas says it's reviewing the latest Israeli ceasefire proposal delivered by Egyptian and Qatari mediators at talks in Cairo. It would include a 6-week pause in fighting and a swap of 40 Israeli hostages for 700 Palestinian prisoners. Speaking to military recruits today, Israel's Prime Minister doubled down on his pledge to eliminate Hamas forces in southern Gaza.
We will complete the elimination of Hamas brigades, including in Rafah. There is no force in the world that will stop us. Many are trying to do so, but it will not help, since this enemy, after what it did, will never do it again.
Meanwhile, Israel says 468 aid trucks entered Gaza today. That's the most since the war began. Gaza was also top of the agenda during the visit to Washington today by British Foreign Secretary David Cameron. Speaking at a joint press conference, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. had not received a date for a full-scale invasion of Rafah, but expects to meet with the Israelis next week.
How Israel conducts any further operations in Gaza matters a great deal, and as we've said, we're talking to them about alternative and, in our judgment, effective ways at solving a problem that needs to be solved, but doing it in a way that does not endanger the innocent.
Blinken and Cameron also both addressed the need for Congress to take action on military aid for Ukraine. That comes as Ukraine says it struck a Russian aviation factory in the Voronezh region, just across Ukraine's eastern border. Security video showed an explosion in Borisovlevsk. Russia says its forces shot down 2 drones. Ukraine has stepped up drone attacks on Russian soil to target the country's military infrastructure. Back in this country, former President Donald Trump has suffered a second defeat in as many days over his bid to delay his hush money trial. A New York appeals court judge rejected his request to stall the proceedings as he fights a gag order. Trump pleaded not guilty last year to 34 counts of falsifying business records related to payments to an adult film star. Jury selection is set to begin next week. On Wall Street today, stocks were little changed for a second day this week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 9 points to close at 38,883. The Nasdaq gained 52 points, and the S&P 500 added 7.5 points. And the college basketball season ended last night with the University of Connecticut claiming the men's championship for a 2nd year running. Still to come on the News Hour, U.S. Ambassador to Japan Rahm Emanuel on this week's state visit by the Japanese Prime Minister. A new series exposes abusive behavior behind the scenes of some popular children's shows. A vital Appalachian cultural hub continues its long recovery after devastating floods, plus much more.
This is the PBS News Hour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Congress arrived back in Washington today with a long list of priorities for Speaker Mike Johnson to accomplish and a razor-thin margin to get it done. Our Lisa Desjardins has this report.
It's been a cold spring in Washington. Beautiful, but may control the fate of Ukraine aid, FISA reauthorization, and most any issue in Congress at the moment. The question is, can he find a way to get anything done and also survive? For the PBS News Hour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
This month, Rwanda is holding observances to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the genocide in that East African nation, a 100-day killing spree that took 1 million lives. Rwanda has won praise for its rebuilding efforts, but democratic backsliding and conflict just outside Rwanda's borders have raised concerns over the country's future stability and fear among survivors of the genocide. Fred DeSam Lazaro has our report, and a caution, the story includes language and images of extreme violence.
The memories from 30 years ago, it seems.
Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is here in Washington, part of a state visit to the U.S. and a trilateral summit with the Philippines tomorrow. Japan is changing its defense posture, rearming in the face of a surging China. Ahead of tomorrow's presidential meetings, we're joined from the White House by the U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel. Thanks for being with us. Welcome to the NewsHour.
Thank you.
So among the many agenda items when these two leaders meet tomorrow is increased military cooperation, enabling military commanders from the U.S. and Japan to better work together. What's the practical impact of that, especially when it comes to containing China?
Well, I would actually not use the word containing, I would use the word deterring from doing something that would change the status quo. Second is, the structure we have was actually established over the years since 1960. It's not appropriate for the future and the type of challenges we face today. Second is, Japan has done a series of things and major changes. They went from 1% of their GDP
to Japan, Rahm Emanuel. Thanks for your time this evening. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. Yep.
The Kids Network, Nickelodeon, helped shape pop culture for decades. But a new docuseries, Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV, is exposing the toxic culture behind some of the most iconic children's shows of the 90s and 2000s. As young viewers flocked to the channel for beloved programs like The Amanda Show and All That, sexual abuse and harassment were rampant behind the scenes. Here's a quick look.
A lot of these kids in the entertainment industry are vulnerable. The power balance between a child and an adult.
Directors Emma Schwartz and Mary Robertson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
In the summer of 2022, historic flooding in eastern Kentucky washed away homes and entire communities, claiming more than 40 lives. It also devastated an important cultural hub for the larger region, Appleshop, home to a large archive of Appalachian history and culture. Jeffrey Brown first brought us Appleshop's story back in 2018. He recently returned for our arts and culture series, Canvas.
Oh boy. Not like what I remember.
A lot different.
It's a center for cultural preservation now struggling to preserve itself. Appleshop in Whitesburg.
To adapt.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown at Appleshop in Whitesburg, Kentucky.
Britain's King Charles was presented with the new banknotes of his reign today. The king, who's being treated for an undisclosed cancer, received the notes bearing his portrait at a brief ceremony at Buckingham Palace. Royal editor Chris Shipp of Independent Television News reports from London.
The Bank of England governor does many things, but rarely does the holder of the post get to present a monarch with a new set of banknotes bearing his or her face. The king apologised for the delay in receiving the notes caused by his cancer treatment, but today the phrase cash is king felt more than appropriate for this particular moment.
And join us back here tomorrow night as Judy Woodruff travels to Oregon for a look at the growing political divide between rural and urban areas in the U.S. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amin Vaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for joining us and have a good evening.
In Europe on France 24 and France24.com. France 24, a different point of view.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Good morning, I'm Oliver Farry, and this is Daybreak. The strongest criticism yet for the Israeli Prime Minister from his American ally. US President Joe Biden says Benjamin Netanyahu is making a big mistake. He condemns last week's killing of 7 aid workers. He urged Israel to agree to a 6 to 8 week ceasefire in Gaza. Arizona effectively bans all abortions, invoking an 1864 law. It's the latest US state to impose a ban on termination of pregnancies, following a Supreme Court ruling in 2022 that revoked federal protections for abortions. South Korea goes to the polls on Wednesday for parliamentary elections that could be make or break for President Yoon Suk-yeol. The president could have to grapple with an opposition-dominated legislature for the next 3 years. We'll be hearing from our regional correspondent, Deanna Lee. US President Joe Biden has delivered his strongest criticism yet of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In an interview with the Spanish-language network Univision, Biden said Netanyahu is making a mistake and condemned last week's Israeli airstrike that killed 7 aid workers in the Gaza Strip. Having already warned that Israel's planned offensive on Rafah would be a grave error, Biden also called on Israel to agree to a ceasefire to allow humanitarian aid through to the Palestinian enclave.
I think what he's doing is a mistake. I don't agree with his approach. I think it's outrageous that those 3 vehicles were hit by drones and taken out on a highway where it wasn't like it was along the shore, it wasn't like there was a convoy moving there, etc. So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country. I've spoken with everyone from the Saudis to the Jordanians to the Egyptians. They're prepared to move in. They're prepared to move this food in. And I think there's no excuse to not provide for the medical and the food needs of those people. They should be done now.
US President Kamala Harris met several family members of hostages held in Gaza at the White House on Tuesday. The families whose relatives were taken in the Hamas-led attacks on southern Israel on October 7th also called for a deal that would release the hostages and implement a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. The Vice President said she and President Joe Biden had no higher priority than reuniting the hostages with their loved ones.
Meeting with Vice President Harris, who carved out time to meet with us.
Gazans are preparing to mark the end of Ramadan this Wednesday, but few people are in a festive mood after the death and destruction they've experienced during 6 months of war. The prevailing circumstances, with the United Nations saying hundreds of thousands are on the brink of famine, mean this will be an Eid al-Fitr like no other.
This year we want to make our children happy, but we don't see a way to do so. There's no Eid here.
Circumstances are challenging. Despite adversity and pain, God willing, we will celebrate Eid. However, this Eid is different from previous years.
How's Eid for people? Very difficult. There's a lot of destruction. There's a heavy siege. There's nothing to eat or drink. It's very difficult.
Millions of Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid al-Fitr today. It marks the end of the holy month of Ramadan, during which the faithful fast from dawn to sunset. Muslims are gathering around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and worshippers are also flocking to the Great Mosque in the holy city of Mecca for the customary prayers this morning. Afterwards, families gather worldwide for big feasts, and one of the first countries to ring in Eid today was the world's most populous Muslim nation, Indonesia. Here's Yinka Oyatade with more.
The city of Jakarta shakes to the beat of drums as Muslims usher in Eid. In the tradition known as takbiran, residents in Indonesia line the streets to a soundtrack of drums and chants.
The takbiran tradition for Muslims is a very happy and joyful moment. We call this a victory.
The city not only comes alive with music, but fireworks and torches too. People here are in full celebration mode after spending the last 30 days fasting from dawn to sunset, alongside millions of other Muslims around the world during the holy month of Ramadan.
The parade, the drumming, the chanting are great to celebrate the moral victory as Ramadan ends.
Some of the revelers here have travelled long hours to reunite with their families to celebrate Eid. The annual migration called Mudik sees millions take to Indonesia's roads, sparking massive traffic jams.
We left last night around 9, and now it's been 13 hours, and we're still stuck in this horrific traffic.
Indonesia's Transport Ministry estimates that up to 193 million people will travel for Eid this year in the world's most populous Muslim-majority country.
More than 100,000 people have been evacuated from their homes in Russia and Kazakhstan as the worst flooding in decades in the region continues. Russian authorities reported that water levels in the Ural River rose 50 millimeters early on Wednesday, inundating more than 300 homes. The flooding in the Central Asian region was caused by rapidly melting snow in the Ural Mountains and has been exacerbated by the breaching of a dam near the city of Orsk earlier this week. The top court in the US state of Arizona has issued a near-total ban on abortion. The Arizona Supreme Court invoked a law from 1864 that only allows the procedure to save the life of the mother. Under the ban, providers can be punished with time in prison. Almost half of US states have enacted restrictions on bans on abortion since the US Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion in 2022. Monty Francis has the story.
In the run-up to the November election in the U.S., abortion is taking center stage. The latest outrage for abortion rights supporters, Arizona's conservative Supreme Court, reviving a Civil War-era law from 1864, effectively outlawing the procedure in almost all cases, including rape and incest, making an exception only when the mother's life is in danger. The law also imposes prison terms of 2 to 5 years for abortion providers. Arizona's Democratic governor cast the court's ruling in stark terms.
It is a dark day in Arizona, and the near-total Civil War-era ban that continues to hang over our heads only serves to create more chaos for women and doctors in our state.
The court's 4-2 decision supersedes the state's previous law, which allowed abortions up to 15 weeks of pregnancy. Arizona now joins a list of 16 other states where abortion is effectively outlawed. Additional states have imposed restrictions since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion in 2022. The White House, which has sought to galvanize Democratic voters to the polls on the issue of abortion, slammed Arizona's top court.
This Arizona law, which was initially enacted in 1864, more than 150 years ago, fails to protect women even when their health is at risk.
Polls show that most Americans oppose abortion bans, and Republicans have felt the consequences when voters have gone to the polls to decide on abortion referendums in 5 states. Democrats in Arizona are now pushing for a November ballot measure to legalize abortion across the state. Meanwhile, the state's near-total ban is set to go into effect in 14 days.
Also in the United States, the parents of a school shooter were each sentenced to at least 10 years in prison Tuesday for failing to take steps that could have prevented the killing of 4 students in 2021. Jennifer and James Crumley were found guilty in separate trials of involuntary manslaughter after they ignored warning signs of an impending incident and for keeping a handgun unsecured at their home. The Michigan couple are the first parents to be convicted in a US school shooting. Now, South Koreans go to the polls on Wednesday for crucial legislative elections that could determine if President Yoon Suk-yeol can press ahead with his policy platforms or face 3 years of a lame duck presidency. The Conservative Yoon has been stymied by a parliament dominated by the Liberal opposition. Polls suggest that state of play could remain after today's elections. For more on this, we're joined from Beijing by our regional correspondent, Yenna Lee. Good morning, Yenna. What's at stake in today's elections and what do voters care about?
Well, President Yoon and his Conservatives hope to win a majority in Parliament because for 2 years now they've been having to work with a Parliament that has overwhelmingly a majority that's controlled by the opposition party. And whilst presidents in Korea wield arguably far more power than parliamentarians, the Blue House, if it had a majority in Parliament, would be able to push through its agenda and its policies far more easily. What's at stake then is Yoon becoming a lame duck with 3 more years left of his single-term mandate. And the president has so many domestic issues to deal with. Firstly, the economy isn't doing so well. There's a slow growth and persistent inflation, a cost of living crisis, if you will. There have been some shocking numbers that really, that voters can really feel in their own pockets. For example, the price of Apple is going up 90% in March, year on year. And then we have the doctor strike. President Yoon has wanted to increase the number of medical school students, that intake, in order to increase, in the end, the number of doctors in South Korea to meet demand. Overall, the general public seems to agree with the president's idea. Doctors don't. They've been on strike for 6 weeks now, though. But the way the government has been dealing with this, well, that has been more open to debate. Because the strike has been dragging on for so long, services in hospitals up and down the country have been affected, and many people are asking for compromise or negotiations to be found as soon as possible. Finally, this vote is also a referendum on President Yoon Suk-yeol and on the leader of the opposition party, Lee Jae-myung. Both men have been dealing with scandal after scandal. South Korean politics polarized as ever, with President Yoon supporters demanding that opposition leader Lee be locked up in prison, and Lee supporters wanting Yoon to be impeached.
And there's also a potential kingmaker who has thrown his hat into the ring. Can you tell us more?
Well, what's really interesting with the election this year is the emergence of a last-minute political party just weeks before this election, created by a disgraced former Justice Minister. Jo Guk served very briefly under President Moon Jae-in. His family has been embroiled in an academic fraud scandal involving his children. His wife even spent time behind bars. And the prosecutor who led the charge was none other than the current president, Yoon Suk-yeol. Now, Jo Guk is back in politics with his new party that only seems to have one particular policy goal in mind at the moment, that is to remove President Yoon from office. For example, their slogan is simply 3 years is too long, in reference to the time the president has left in the Blue House. Other than this, we don't know much about their vision. We do know that they will surely align with the traditional Democratic Party in a parliament should they win the number of seats that they have been projected to win. The question, though, is will Joe manage to simply tear away votes from the Democratic Party, or will he also attract jaded voters, the undecided, the people who have been fed up with the rivalry between the current president and the leader of the opposition party? Because these are the types of people who could really decide on the makeup of the incoming 300-seat legislature. All of that said, though, it's not a given to say that the public would prefer one rivalry over another, and there has been a lot of political mess, political drama, whilst the cost of living crisis still drags on.
Thank you very much for that, Fiona Lee in Beijing. Now, members of the European Parliament will vote Wednesday on a package of new laws on immigration and asylum that could see asylum seekers sent to non-EU countries. The laws are expected to tighten EU migration policy ahead of European elections this summer, where far-right parties across the bloc are expected to fare well. But NGOs and migration rights groups say the proposed laws will undermine human rights. That's all we have time for now, but do stay tuned for more news coming up on France 24.
Unready.
Dozens of passengers have been rescued after a bus they were traveling in was swept away by flood waters on the river bridge in northern Kenya. The bus, with about 51 passengers, was heading to the capital, Nairobi, from northern Wajir County, according to the police. Though the bus remained stuck in the river some 30 meters away from the bridge, authorities say all 51 passengers have now been rescued. The Kenyan Red Cross said it was a challenging rescue operation to save the lives of who were marooned by raging waters. Some of the passengers were rescued from the roof of the vehicle. The incident happened just hours after Kenya's Roads Agency on Monday announced the closure of another section of the same road that was flooded due to continuing heavy rains. The government had issued a flood alert to residents of Tana River and Lamu counties after a dam upstream was breached by flooding.
The Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a region beset by fighting between government forces and the M23 militia. On Monday, the Southern African Development Community said 3 Tanzanian soldiers were killed and 3 others wounded when hostile mortar fire landed near their camp. They were taking part in a peacekeeping force deployed in December last year to help government troops tackle instability and armed groups in the region. The force includes soldiers from South Africa, Tanzania and Malawi. M23 militants launched their offensive in late 2021, capturing swathes of the strategically important and resource-rich North Kivu province. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame has criticized the United States, saying Washington had not characterized the 1994 massacre of around 800,000 people as a genocide against the country's minority Tutsis. He said he believed he'd reached an agreement with US authorities for them not to voice any criticism on the day of the anniversary.
When it is the day of commemoration, which is 7th of April, can you be kind enough to commemorate with us and stop there? And there are 365 days in a year. Give us that day of 7th of April, commemorate with us, and then you can have the rest 364 days blaming us every day for everything you don't like about us.
His comments came after US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a post on X failed to specify that the Tutsi ethnic group was targeted. Kigali says hundreds of Hutu suspects remain at large, including in neighboring Congo.
Why are we being accused as Rwanda of supporting M23? And I'm saying even those who accuse us, actually I should accuse them of not supporting M23 because it is as if they agree with the injustice that is being done to this community. Otherwise, if you didn't agree with that injustice, you would be actually raising questions. Why are these people of M23 being treated like this? Why are we having 100,000 refugees here in Rwanda?
He said the M23 are fighting for the rights of Congolese Tutsis in eastern Congo.
On this Tuesday night, landmark judgment. A top European court rules Switzerland's climate inaction violates human rights. This is only the beginning. The potential implications for other countries. Top aides to the Prime Minister testify at the foreign interference inquiry and dispute what the head of CSIS has said. There was a mistake made. In the U.S., the first parents to be sentenced for a mass shooting committed by their child. You failed as parents. The harsh words from victims' families. and the nature of things.
They were basically asking what just happened.
How animals reacted to Monday's total eclipse.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. For the first time, we're getting precise details about what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau knew about suspected foreign interference in the 2019 and 2021 federal elections and when he knew it. Dozens of documents labeled secret or top secret were entered as evidence at the inquiry into foreign interference today. And as David Aiken explains, the Prime Minister's top aide testified about when Justin Trudeau was briefed about potential security breaches, including involving allegations against a former Liberal MP, Han Dong.
Justin Trudeau was in the midst of campaigning in the 2019 election when he was first told about potential irregularities in the Liberal nomination race in the riding of Don Valley North. Liberal campaign director Jeremy Broadhurst briefed the Prime Minister personally after security agencies had briefed party officials.
Think that the leader of the party should be aware of them?
No action was taken. That 2019 nomination race was won by Han Dong, who would then go on to become the MP. The public would not know about allegations of Chinese interference in Don Valley North for more than 2 years when, in 2023, Global News and the Globe and Mail first reported on them, citing national security sources. Global News also reported that Dong had a telephone conversation with a Chinese diplomat in Canada. Global cited national security sources that said in that call, Dong had suggested the release of the two Michaels, then still in captivity in China, be delayed. Shortly after, Dong resigned from the Liberal caucus and now sits as an independent MP. Dong subsequently sued Global News and rejects the allegations reported by Global. Dong has insisted that he always advocated for the early release of the two Michaels. The Prime Minister's top aides told the inquiry Tuesday that when the Dong stories first appeared, they wanted to publish the full intelligence about that phone call Dong made, but were told they could not do so for national security reasons.
We couldn't actually, in a clear way, defend Han Dong against this allegation, which was wrong.
Intelligence officials testified last week that their summaries about this call came with caveats that they could be incomplete or may need further context, but they did not describe the summaries they provided as wrong. Trudeau's closest aide, Chief of Staff Katie Telford, testified Tuesday that at one meeting last year, intelligence officials did concede they were wrong about an intelligence assessment.
And there was one instance that's referenced here where there was a mistake made, where there was a threat linked to an MP that didn't seem right.
She said security officials subsequently reversed that assessment. Now, was that assessment about Dong or was it about someone else? That crucial bit of information cannot be put on the public record by the inquiry or anyone else for national security reasons. Donna.
All right, David Aiken in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, David. Israel's Prime Minister says no one can stop his plan for a ground invasion into the southern Gaza city of Rafah, where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering. There is no force in the world that will stop us, Benjamin Netanyahu told new army recruits today. He is still vowing to eradicate Hamas. Israeli officials claim today the amount of aid arriving in Gaza has significantly increased. The UN disputes that, saying many of the trucks Israel allowed in over the last 2 days were only half full. Israel has been accused of using food as a weapon of war, and UN agencies say all evidence points towards an acceleration of death and malnutrition in Gaza. Canada promised to help get some relatives of Canadian citizens out of Gaza, but even the federal minister in charge admits that temporary visa program has failed. The government says 108 people who have managed to get to Egypt from Gaza did so without the help of the Immigration Department. Heather Yurix West has the story of one family's harrowing experience.
Hello.
That's everyone.
After 6 months of terror and loss, it's a beautiful sight to behold.
This is Akram.
Hi. Tamar Jarada's sister, Ashan, his wife's sister, Asma, and their 6 children away from the war in Gaza in Egypt, where they will be safe. What was that first phone call?
It was full of screams, laughs. We also cried a lot.
The war has left no room for life in Gaza. Jarada's sister Ashan tells us from Cairo, I lost all my family. I have no one left. Gaza is now a graveyard in my eyes. In late October, Tamar and Ashan lost their parents, 2 sisters, and 13 other family members in an Israeli airstrike. Ashan and her children were then forced to flee to the refugee tents of Rafah. She was pregnant at the time. Can you ask your sister about what it was like to bring a child, to give birth in these conditions? She says, never in my life did I imagine the baby I had waited 9 years for would be delivered in a hospital with no disinfection, no sanitation. I was given stitches without anesthesia. I felt as if my soul was leaving my body when the doctor was stitching me up. With newborn baby Adam sick with an infection and the threat of bombs and hunger all around, Jarada was desperate to get his family out. But with the Canadian government unable to secure safe passage out of Gaza, Jarada had to turn to operatives from Egypt for help.
We were left with only one option, which is taking this matter into our hands and technically buying our family's lives.
At a cost of $69,000 and counting, money the family has had to borrow and fundraise, 10 of Jarada's 17 loved ones are now safe and awaiting their Canadian visas to be approved. Heather Yurix West, Global News, Calgary.
In the U.S., the first parents to ever be held criminally responsible for their child's mass shooting were sentenced today, and they faced families of the victims in court. Jackson Prosco on the heart-wrenching moments and the message this landmark ruling sends.
It is the sense of this court that you serve 10 to 15 years.
James and Jennifer Crumbly were each given nearly the maximum penalty for involuntary manslaughter.
Repeated acts or lack of acts that could have halted an oncoming runaway train.
In court, families of the young victims delivered emotional impact statements.
I remain a shell of the person that I used to be.
They explained how their world was shattered when 15-year-old Ethan Crumbly opened fire inside a Michigan high school in 2021, killing 4 and wounding 7.
I was forced to do the worst possible thing a parent could do. I was forced to say goodbye to my medicine.
Crumbly pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life. His parents were later charged for failing to lock up the handgun he used. Both were found guilty.
Listen to me, any parents. Here are my shoes.
The trials focused heavily on whether the Crumblys did enough to address their son's mental health issues.
I was not aware of, or that he was planning
or that he obtained access to firearms in my house.
The groundbreaking case is described as a rare instance in which a school shooting could so easily have been stopped.
What these families have gone through, and it is preventable.
Though the Crumleys are expected to appeal, their trial could be a roadmap for future prosecutions of parents whose children engage in gun violence. Jackson Crosco, Global News, Washington.
The federal government has committed $500 million to help community organizations in Canada provide young people with mental health support.
We want to make sure that it's a full continuum of support for particularly young people when they need the trust. They need to build safe spaces for themselves that don't always come in the traditional methods that of healthcare service providers.
The Youth Mental Health Fund will be handed out over the next 4 years. It is the latest in a string of campaign-style announcements ahead of next week's federal budget. And I will host a live special when that federal budget comes down, Tuesday, April 16th, right here on Global and on all our streaming platforms. There is a big legal victory for those pushing governments to reach their climate targets. Europe's top human rights court has ruled the Swiss government violated its citizens' human rights by failing to do enough to tackle climate change. At the same time, temperatures around the world hit an all-time high for a 10th consecutive month. Data from the European Union Climate Agency shows global air temperatures reached an average of over 14 degrees Celsius last month, making it the hottest March on record. Sea temperatures also hit an all-time high, just over 21 degrees Celsius. A group of 2,000 women in Switzerland made the case that heat waves linked to climate change are affecting their health, and today they won. Redmond Shannon explains the ruling and its implications.
With their blue scarves, these Swiss women say they have taken a step toward realizing a green goal.
Nous pouvons être très fiers.
We can be very proud. The court has recognized us and our fundamental right to a healthy climate.
Known as the Climate Seniors, they took the case to Europe's top court, arguing the heating planet is affecting how they, as older women, can live their lives. The court found Switzerland's inaction on climate violated the women's human rights.
This included a failure to quantify, through a carbon budget or otherwise, national greenhouse gas emissions limitations. The respondent state had previously failed to meet its past greenhouse gas emission reduction targets.
It is the highest court to hand down such a ruling.
We take this obligation seriously, but we need time to examine which measures could be proposed.
The women admit that the harshest impacts of climate change will come after they die, but say they are doing this for future generations. The ruling coming on a day when scientists revealed that last month was the warmest March on record, the 10th such monthly record in a row. The court rejected 2 similar cases on Tuesday, but those plaintiffs said the ruling on the Swiss case gives hope to them and other campaigners.
This means that we have to fight even more, since this is only the beginning, because in a climate emergency, everything is at stake.
I think this is a huge moment for all of those communities in the 100 cases or so around the world who are taking their governments to court.
Similar cases are proceeding in Canadian courts, but the climate knows no borders. Many more rulings such as this may be needed to force worldwide collective action. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Urging change after a tragedy, coming out the push for Edmonton to reform its animal control bylaws.
Assalamu alaikum, live from Gaza. I want to acknowledge and thank Legend Institute to get more donations and Al-Amal into
After an 11-year-old boy was killed in a dog attack in Edmonton, there is heated debate underway about accountability for pet owners and the city's animal control bylaws. Itu Garcha reports on the urgent calls for reform.
A family's grief echoes through this quiet Edmonton neighborhood. Cash Grist was visiting his father for spring break when tragedy struck on Easter Monday. An autopsy confirmed his cause of death was a dog bite.
So I just walked across the kitchen and that's when I found him.
Wesley Grist described his son as a gentle soul who adored his father's roommate's 2 Cane Corso dogs who have since been euthanized.
I watch these dogs cuddle with him almost every day.
The fatal attack has ignited a debate over animal control bylaws and safety.
I would never normally put my son in a situation where I thought he was going to be hurt.
Cash lived with his mother in Asuyas, BC. She spoke with Global News by phone a few days after her son's death, saying she was surprised to learn the dogs had a history of violent behavior.
I had no idea. If I would have known, I would have never let him go.
The city of Edmonton confirms there had been multiple complaints about the dogs, including 2 reports of attacks this year.
The dog owner knew that these dogs had harmed other people in the past.
Personal injury lawyer Raj Bogle says he represents a woman who was attacked by the same dogs in February.
She has at least 2 fractured ribs, a punctured lung.
Global News tried to contact the dog owner but has not been able to reach her.
To be candid, it really needs an overhaul.
Canadian animal law Jenna Friedman says the wording of Edmonton's bylaw is confusing, making understanding rights challenging for both enforcement officials and dog owners.
As a lawyer, I had trouble following that particular bylaw. There are a lot of things that are missing that are present in many other bylaws across Canada.
She says the city is faced with a critical opportunity for reflection and action to prevent such tragedies as a heartbroken family prepares for Cash's funeral on Sunday. Nitu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
The railroad company Norfolk Southern will pay $600 million to settle a class action lawsuit over a fiery train derailment in Ohio. The spill of toxic chemicals in East Palestine last year was extensive. Hundreds of residents had to flee, and there are concerns about long-term health effects. If approved, the settlement would resolve all class action claims within a 20-mile radius of that derailment. It would also resolve personal injury claims within a 10-mile radius. Norfolk Southern says it is not admitting liability or fault. Mining minerals for EV batteries still ahead what Canadian industry leaders say they need. The federal government wants every new light-duty vehicle sold in Canada by 2035 to be electric. There are questions about how to achieve that, including what it will take to maintain a steady supply of batteries. As Mike Drolet explains, getting there will require heavy lifting from Canada's mining industry.
It isn't called a gigafactory for nothing.
The Justin Trudeau Liberals bet big with a retooled auto industry. The promised jobs, and not just at massive EV battery plants in Windsor and St. Thomas, Ontario. The big picture saw manufacturing complemented by indirect jobs in the mining industry, because all the minerals needed for EVs, including lithium, known as battery white gold, here for the taking.
When I talk to government officials, when I talk to the mining companies, I really stress that if we don't do this right, what we fail to do today will come back to haunt us.
The first part of the retooling strategy, the EV plants, is nearing completion. The second part, the mines, looks less certain, in part due to the financial markets. Over the past couple of years, the price of lithium is down a staggering 81%, cobalt 64%, and nickel 41%, dampening the mood of investors looking to build mines. And unlike the heavily taxpayer-subsidized battery manufacturing, here for the taking.
When I talk to government officials and when I talk to the mining companies, I really stress that if we don't do this right, what we fail to do today will come back to haunt us.
The first part of the retooling strategy, the EV plants, is nearing completion. The second part, the mines, looks less certain, in part due to the financial markets. Over the past couple of years, the price of lithium is down a staggering 81%, cobalt 64%, and nickel 41%, dampening the mood of investors looking to build mines. And unlike the heavily taxpayer-subsidized battery manufacturing plants, the mining industry is on its own. Canada's 2022 critical mineral strategy suggested the industry look to the private sector for investments.
It would be disappointing if we don't build out the supply chain, but I think we can and we will. It will take a lot of political will, and it will take capital.
But when? It's been 2 years since the first EV plant was announced. Minister of Energy and Natural Resources Jonathan Wilkinson says the support is there through a critical minerals fund and tax credits announced in last year's budget. But as of today, no money from the fund has been doled out, and the tax credits aren't yet available.
Those are in the process of actually being finalized now, and they will be available within the next number of months for companies that actually want to make those kinds of investments.
While many companies are waiting for a financial boost, RockTech, for one, is betting big on a lithium price rebound.
We have a mining project that requires a couple of hundreds of millions in order to get into production, and then the refining side of things, here we're talking 1 to 1.5 billion Canadian dollars to get that into production.
When the Red Rock, Ontario plant is up and running, it will be the first lithium mine in the province, but it alone won't be able to put a dent in demand.
And for lithium, there's two options: do it yourself or get it from China.
International support was expected for the first few years. The question now, is independence still attainable? Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Tomorrow, Mike looks at the long process of importing lithium into Canada and the concerns that could drive up the emissions EVs aim to reduce. Animal instincts next, how the total eclipse affected the behavior of animals. There is some new cash in the UK. At Buckingham Palace today, King Charles came face-to-face with his own image on banknotes. The King's face replaces his mother's image on new 5, 10, 20, and 50-pound notes. They go into circulation in June. Existing money with the late Queen's image will remain in circulation too. The Bank of Canada says the design process is underway here, but it will be several years before the King is on our $20 bill. Well, we know millions of humans were captivated by the total eclipse yesterday, and of course we know what's going on. But what about animals? Suddenly, their world goes dark in the middle of the day. Researchers at a Quebec zoo decided to keep a close eye on 15 different animals to see how they behaved. Mike Armstrong reports on what they observed.
How much time did you spend here yesterday? I was here for 3 hours. He snuck out every once in a while to peek at the sky, but during the eclipse, Pierre Chastenet's focus was on Granby Zoo's macaque monkeys. They didn't do much of anything, he says, until about 10 minutes before totality. As it got dark, they gathered together the way they always do to sleep. Where it got interesting was when it suddenly got bright again.
They were not animated. They were very calm, very still. They didn't move, but they were yelling, with whatever they were saying in their macaque world.
Now, the zoo's observation teams were out again Tuesday. They're watching 15 different species. They did 2 days before the eclipse, and they're doing 2 days post-eclipse. That'll give them the baseline to determine how the animals normally behave and if anything was different during the eclipse. Well, most animals didn't have any reaction, but 2 that stood out were zebras and ostriches. Chastenet has a theory that they may have instinctually felt in danger from predators when it suddenly got dark.
We saw in the zebras, for instance, that they went galloping around their habitat. They were yelling a lot.
What do you think about that?
Now, there are stronger reactions being reported out of other zoos. Animals were more agitated as the eclipse reached totality, but other zoos were open to the public, and that likely affected the animals. Humans during the eclipse tended to get quite excited.
What we were able to do is have a real observation of natural behavior of animals during an eclipse, and not animal behavior influenced by human behavior during an eclipse.
Chastenet has about 50,000 data points to analyze and weeks of work ahead, but his preliminary findings are that some animals react to an eclipse as though it's nighttime, others don't react at all, and in both cases, within minutes, everything's back to normal. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Granby, Quebec.
That's Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Canmore, Alberta. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers at globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
This is Asia Now.
It's 2 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 11:30 in New Delhi, and 1 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Paul Sip. At this hour, voting underway nationwide in South Korea's legislative elections. The rising cost of living and a medical care crisis taking center stage, with the poll widely seen as a referendum on President Yoon Suk-yeol's time in office. US President Joe Biden welcomes Japan's Fumio Kishida to the White House ahead of a bilateral meeting with defense cooperation topping the agenda amid rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific. At least 5 people killed and dozens injured after a fire broke out in a densely populated building in Hong Kong's Kowloon district. Voting is underway in South Korea to elect the country's next National Assembly, a poll that will shape the country's political landscape for the next 4 years and possibly set the tone for the 3 remaining years of President Yoon Suk-yeol's term. It's seen as a major political test for Mr. Yoon, who has been suffering from low approval ratings for months. Experts say he could lose further momentum if his party performs poorly in the election or is unable to claim a majority in parliament. All 300 seats are up for grabs. About 44 million people are eligible to vote. Some 30% have already cast their ballots during a 2-day early voting session last week, which saw a record turnout. Voters will cast 1 ballot for their district representative and 1 for the political party to decide the share of the proportional representative seats in the legislature. The 2 main parties are the ruling People's Power Party and the opposition Democratic Party, but discontent with the political establishment has given smaller parties a rare opportunity to gain ground, including the 4-week-old Rebuilding Korea Party. The fledgling party is forecast to win up to 15 seats, which could prevent Mr. Yoon's party from regaining control of the assembly. Some of the voters who visited the polling booth in Seoul expressed hope of seeing their lawmakers unite.
지금 이 나라가 지금 여도하고 굉장히 분명히 분열된 것 같아서 분명히 분열되지 않고 잘 합의가 돼서 나라가 안정된 나라, 굳건하게 사는 나라가 됐으면 좋겠습니다.
네, 저하고 따지지 말고 좀 국가를 위해서 건전한 능력을 가지고 서로 대화를 하고 타협을 했으면 좋겠습니다.
Earlier, CNA spoke to affiliate Professor Kim Byung-ju from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. He shared with us his thoughts on President Yoon Suk-yeol's stopgap economic relief measures and if they are able to sway voters.
There are certain ideas that he has raised during the campaign and before the campaign. The thing is, in terms of actual policies that have been introduced for the last about 2 years or so, it will be difficult to call these policies as stopgap and populist. It's kind of traditional policy measures that would expect from a conservative government side. And so it's not like he's not paying attention to budget balance, and then everything is indeed very conservative. And one example is reduction of Korea's R&D spending on to be supplied by the government budget. That was for the first time in several decades, and that's a measure in order to achieve better integrity and balance in the budget and so on. So indeed, his policy has been largely traditional conservative side, but however, the opposition side have raised a lot of different issues about it. So once again, this highlights the fact that this election has been largely about political fights rather than having different kind of clearly divided policy options.
Well, I just want to bring our attention to the plan for more medical school spots that has been one that really brought the country's healthcare to a standstill. What do you think of the timing of the announcement? And perhaps even we can speak about the still unresolved situation. Do you think that this is a miscalculation for President Yoon and one that's really striking back at him at a very crucial point in time?
I do agree with you. In my own personal opinion, there is a strong evidence that President Yoon and his government wanted to use this issue to show to the people that they're able to resolve this issue, a very important one, for the first time in their claim in nearly 3 decades. They claim that government had to give in to doctors for 3 decades, and now they're going to show the result. But the thing is, it backfired, and doctors did not come along, and they didn't want to make a negotiation, make a deal with the Yoon government. So the timing-wise, there was a risk taking on the side of the government, trying to show the result before the election, but it is not coming. And so as a result of it, it has resulted in becoming some kind of political liability for the president and the government, showing their inability indeed of resolving difficult issues. So it went the other way.
US President Joe Biden has welcomed Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to the White House for a much-anticipated bilateral summit. Mr. Kishida is the first Japanese premier to make a state visit to the United States since 2015. The leader earlier attended a roundtable hosted by the US Chamber of Commerce, where he highlighted the potential for more cooperation with the US in the next-gen computer chips. Tech is set to be high on the agenda at the leader summit, with key agreements on AI jobs and defense likely to be announced.
Over the course of the visit, the President and the Prime Minister will highlight the high ambition of our alliance. Yes, in the defense and technology space, but also across the board, deepening our partnerships on space, technology, economic investment, fighting climate change, coordinating global diplomacy, and strengthening our people-to-people ties.
When Prime Minister Kishida holds talks with President Biden, shared concerns about China and a rare public difference over Japanese companies' plan to buy US steel will be in the spotlight. CNA's Mitsuo Ishida has more on what this visit could mean for bilateral ties.
Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's first state visit to the U.S. aims to show that both countries are strong partners in ensuring a free and open international order based on the rule of law, according to the Japanese Foreign Ministry. For this, defense is likely to top the agenda. The summit between Mr. Kishida and Mr. Biden is expected to address possible cooperation on military technology projects between Japan and AUKUS, a trilateral security pact involving the US, Australia, and the UK. Local media reports also say Japan and the US will agree to work together to develop a satellite network to detect and track hypersonic glide weapons, which North Korea and China are developing. Both sides are also set to agree on a plan to modernize their military command structures so they can better operate together, with the US having about 50,000 troops in Japan. This comes as Japan has announced plans to sharply increase defense spending by 2027. For the Japanese public, a mightier Japan was not what they wished for, with many holding on to the peaceful ideals in Japan's pacifist constitution. But this is changing. A nationwide poll by major daily Yomiuri Shimbun this year showed 84% of respondents feel national security is at risk. They see China as the biggest threat, followed by Russia and North Korea. On the business front, Mr. Kishida is expected to showcase Japan's contribution to the U.S. economy. He will visit Toyota and Honda factories in North Carolina, investments that are set to create jobs. Mr. Biden has opposed a planned takeover of U.S. steel by Japan's Nippon Steel. Some observers see this as a politically motivated move to avoid upsetting the business community ahead of the U.S. presidential election, and this could be the biggest sticking point in bilateral ties. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
At least 5 people killed and 35 others injured after a fire broke out in a residential and commercial building in Hong Kong's Kowloon district. Around 150 people have reportedly been evacuated to safety. Authorities say that the fire had started at a gym on the first floor of the 16-story building. The blaze, rated 3 in the city's 5-grade system, was doused an hour after fire services were alerted. Some surrounding roads had to be sealed off, disrupting the morning rush hour traffic. Hong Kong's chief executive John Lee has instructed authorities to make an all-out effort to treat the injured. Investigations are ongoing. Your Asia Business Update is next, including Fitch downgrades China's sovereign credit rating to negative, prompting an immediate response from the world's second-largest economy. And later, Alibaba stock surges after a rare memo from its enigmatic co-founder sparks speculation he may want to take a more active role following years of staying out of the spotlight.
PLC is ground zero for how decisions are made on where capital goes. And with this ecosystem that we've built, we are identifying, incubating, and supporting promising startups with breakthrough innovations go from the lab into commercial markets.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.